Welcome to the How to Heal podcast, the show where we explore real life stories and practical tools to thrive. I'm your host, Lindsay Richter, and through over a 15-year journey of all things healing, I'm here to hook it up. If you're feeling overwhelmed, looking for a deeper connection, or straight up in a psychospiritual crisis, I got you covered. Let's unearth your unique elixir to purpose, peace, and progress. Here we go. All right. So today is typically an interview day, but I'm going to do a deep dive on my healing journey and who I am and what I've been through, not the sappy portion of it, but just like the portion that you need to know that'll help you understand why I feel apt to talk about this stuff. And, I'm going to hit on all of the categories that I discuss in podcast so we can sort of look at my life, how I've approached it, how I had to change things, and now how I approach my life and why I'm so passionate about really teaching this philosophy and these understandings, these knowings. So if I just break it down into three sections of my life, I wrote like 1 to 21. I had a really decent, good uh, a child life. That's what I was going to say. A child life, childhood. And it was normal for the most part, whatever that means. I grew up in the 80s. In the 90s, I had Game Boy by the time I was 10. It was dope. I'm like, if I just get Game Boy, it's my grandparents. If you get me Game Boy, I never need any gift in my life ever again. I remember that was also in the same breath of me being like, when I get my driver's license, the first place I'm going is Toys R Us. But I would say I went to this magical private school on the North Shore of Long Island, which I don't live far from now. And it was magical because we went to school in this old Tudor mansion that was on like acres and acres of property. And there were bushes that we would be able to like go under the bushes and find berries and flowers and make potions. And it was just like a very magical land. And I was very blessed to be able to go to the school. But when I turned 12 and I went to middle school, it was a hard year. 12 was like a really hard year. And my parents then took me out of that school and they put me into a Catholic school. And then from 7th grade to 12th grade, I went to this Catholic school. And I would say there was a very clear difference in my life during those two chapters. I think the first chapter, from 1 to 12, I was just sort of like living in my own bubble and not really knowing, like, just being a kid. And then when I turned 12, I think I mentioned this in one of my first episodes, I got bullied like very badly, even in my private school. And then in Catholic school, I got bullied so badly. And I actually got bullied in pre-K. So like whatever, this is not a bullying story, but this is just like a general come to reality lens, like, life isn't all good. And when I like started going and like 8th grade hit, and then all of a sudden the freshmen were noticing me. And then when the people that were bullying me started to like STFU. And when I got into high school, I was sort of like deemed the popular girl, the popular, tall, athletic, pretty, funny girl who smiles a lot. And then I could only hold that persona up for about a year. My sophomore year of high school, I was just like, whoa, I have a drinking problem before I even knew I had a drinking problem. And then I stopped drinking in high school. And I didn't do drugs in high school, which was just so funny because I was just doing other destructive things, mainly like mindset stuff, mainly like swallowing feelings and then thinking my way out of having to deal with those feelings. And I had to swallow a lot of things that just were not kosher. And by the time I was 18, I had had 8 root canals and 8 car accidents. And that all happened within, I want to say, like 18 months. That year in August, my grandmother passed away. My life shattered because my grandma was, on my father's side, was just like my spirit buddy. And she was like, "You're psychic and this and then we're related to Pocahontas." And, some of it was true, some of it wasn't. But I loved my grandma. I still love my grandma. My grandma's around and helps me out all the time. But when she passed away, my life shattered because I went off to college. And I had all this like baggage all of a sudden. I was like, oh, like all these feelings, I can't hide all this shit anymore. Like now there's actually evidence of dysfunction in my life. And I went off to college and I gotten such good grades in high school. And then in college, like towards the last year and a half of high school, I was just like dicking off. I didn't care. And I ended up going to Binghamton, and it was just going from private to Catholic to public was a very big shift in reality. And it like let me peek into the layers of what real people deal with, not in like an uber exclusive private school, but like in real life, like in the public school system. And I just got, by the time I was 21, I partied a lot. And then but I also like loved a lot. I want to just share these two things. I promise there's merit to me telling these stories. I had 2 times in my life where there were symbols in my life. And I didn't really know. I actually have this book called The Book of Symbols sitting on my bookshelf over there. And I bought it because I knew that these 2 moments of me seeing these objects were symbols. I didn't know what to call it until just like the last few years. But the first symbol I ever saw was on my best friend's wrist, and it was a bike chain bracelet. And I don't know why, but for whatever reason, I didn't know my best friend at the time, but I saw her wearing that bracelet and I was like, it was almost like all of my energy was like consumed by this symbol, which was the bracelet. And I just had to go talk to her and just ask her about the bracelet. And to this day, it was just like a very visceral response to, like a piece of jewelry. And then the funny thing is the second symbol that I had in my life was on my college sweetheart's wrist. It was a white baby G-Shock, if you guys remember those watches. And we were in psych stats in the lecture hall, and I just saw the watch and I was like, whoa. And it was that same thing. And I would say, even at that time when I saw the watch, I didn't put together that it was like the same feeling that I had with the bracelet. But looking back on it, like those 2 people in my life were, and my best friend is still my dear best friend to this day. But those were critical people in my life that really taught me how to love and how to have an emotional connection to the infinite source of love and just like what that means. And like, no expectations, just like I feel so loving towards you. I don't know where it comes from. And, that's sort of feeling, which I just wanted to mention symbols for anyone who it's feeling relevant for. But it was like a draw to that person, that circumstance, that feeling that taught me, that really was like a piggyback for me through those really difficult years. So I would say once I graduated college, I mentioned so I thought I wanted to be an attorney. I worked at a law firm. I said, "Oh my God, no." And then I went to graduate school for real estate development. And that was like 22 to like whatever. That at 22 is when I moved into the city. And at 25 is when I first got sick. And I had just accumulated these really bad habits around feeling really sad and then just like shoving food down my throat and then like masking the feeling and going to sleep. And it was just a terrible cycle because I remember I would have to like wake up in the morning and get dressed for like school or for work and like put these like clothes on that like didn't fit me properly because I just felt like crap because I just ate like a pint or two of ice cream or whatever it was. And it just felt so, it felt like a trap. It felt like so miserable. And it felt like I just didn't have the tools or resources to handle the emotions any other way. And just, between smoking cigarettes and then drinking and smoking weed and like partying sporadically and eating like unhealthily and not sleeping well because I lived in a really loud apartment. By the time I was 25, my microbiome, my gut, which by the way, I just read something about root canals and the connection with just the microbiome and how unhealthy it is, which is just like, okay, great. Now what am I going to do? Like go get all these root canals out and then go get insulin plants? Like, no, thanks. Um, I'll keep you posted on that one. But just like it caught up and I got sick mentally and I got paranoid and my life became the Truman Show and everything had so much meaning and license plates seemed to represent everything, but it was just out of control. It was just way too much information. And I forgot to say the portal to all of this stuff was when I went on my insurance plan and I looked for a yoga instructor and I'm like, yo, I can get insurance to cover my yoga because I took like yoga classes in college for credits. And this woman came up who was on 34th and Park and I lived on 34th and 3rd. And yes, I lived above the Joshua Tree. And it was now like a high-rise building and it was so fucking loud. But anyway, I digress. She's like, yeah, sure. As long as she's like, you have an established hatha practice. And I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely, I took 6 credits of yoga in college. And she's like, okay, come to my apartment. So I went to her apartment and I started practicing Kundalini yoga. And I had no idea what this was. Basically, it's a form of mudras, which is like a harnessing of a certain intention and a power of that intention with very intense breath work. And the point is to like raise the Kundalini through the serpent spine from your root to your crown. And that happened for me very quickly. And I had what they call like a Kundalini awakening. And whether or not you're listening, just like, oh no, that's not a Kundalini awakening. Like, I don't care what it was enough to drive me way insane. I literally lost about 25 pounds in 2 weeks. I was just completely not in touch with reality and alone and scared and paranoid. And that I mentioned this, I mentioned that I went to the hospital. My boyfriend at the time, who was also living in Manhattan, eventually ended up like calling my parents because he was like, she's not eating and that's not her. Like, I think he tried to like feed me a bunch of Indian food and I didn't eat it. And he's like, something's wrong. And it was probably just, like 2-3 days into just not sleeping, not eating, having completely just getting download after download after download of like really ungrounded, scary information. And it was why I'm really doing this podcast, because I think that this is going to happen for people a lot right now, especially with, I mentioned this AI and all this stuff, but like those instances of that happened and more than I'd like to admit, and I'm brutally honest on this podcast, which, I hope will pay off in the end. I think a lot of people have said, don't tell people that. Don't tell, oh my God, like, don't share that. But like, what the fuck? This is my story. I'm sharing it because this is how I have to live my life and no one else is going to tell you how to live your life. So I'm leading the way. But I want to say that happened maybe 5 times. And the first 2 times I was put in the hospital. The first time I was in the hospital for about 5 days. And then my ex-boyfriend came and I saw him and I'm like, what? It was like I snapped out of it. I was like, oh, this is all a misunderstanding. This is a mistake. So I left. And then the second time I did not snap out of it. And I was there for quite some time. I was there for about 3 weeks and doctors couldn't figure out what it was. Doctors couldn't diagnose me properly. They were thinking that I wasn't taking the medication that they were giving me. They ended up having to give me like drinkable medicine because they were like, there's no way you can't be taking this medicine. But I was like so plugged in to this source of information, I want to say spiritually, but I was not physically, mentally, and emotionally grounded to temper the source, temper the information, temper the energy that was coming through. And, I think what ended up happening over those times of me getting sick was I was refusing to accept, look at, I was refusing to accept the information I was getting. And it was totally understandable. Like it was felt very black or white. And I think a lot of this is, like, oh, this is exemplary of a bipolar episode or whatever you want to call it. But I mean, it was black or white. It was like, this is good, this is bad. And more than half of my life was just bad. All of the behaviors I was engaging in, the path I was choosing was in my mind at this point bad. And I refused to accept that answer, even though I didn't have the answers. I refused to accept that I was seeing what I was seeing because I needed to learn how to integrate becoming more of who I am now, more of the distancing in order to be able to see clearly, in order to be able to stay in the middle, in order to be able to be like not so emotionally or psychically like scared or attached to the outcome, not feeling so guilty. Felt a lot of guilt. And I think by the time I was 31, that was the last time that I sort of lost control of the ship, let's call it. Earlier on, I mentioned this in the episode with Amy, like I made a promise with my therapist that I was never going to the hospital again, no matter what, if this was happening. So when it did happen, I stayed with my parents. And every time that this happened, I had to pause what I was doing professionally, like in my life. So I had to stop working and I had to take a break because I just wasn't thinking or speaking or communicating clearly. That is the basis of why I do what I do. It took me, and I'm still learning how to incorporate and integrate the information that I saw and that I continue to see. All that, like that light that got shined in on my crown when doing Kundalini yoga, all that psychic information, it never went away. So this podcast helps you once you get that feeling, that information, that download, that loss of control, the fear, like all of the things. Once you have a spiritual awakening, or regardless of whether it's a spiritual awakening or just like whatever you want to call it at the moment that you're at now, maybe you want to call it a mental health issue, which it was not just a mental health issue. It was a physical, mental, and emotional imbalance responding to a spiritual crisis. Essentially is what it was. But that's how I define it. So if that resonates with you, take it. If it doesn't, then don't. Those were like the first two parts of my life. And the first part was really building up to the perfect storm of just having this physical imbalance to the point where there was like no turning back. I, was not physically well, not sleeping, not eating properly, I had these chemicals in my body from my teeth. I was doing, recreational drugs. I was drinking and smoking cigarettes. I was taking Adderall. Like it was just the perfect storm. And luckily, from 33 to now, I have 43. I'll be 43 next month. I'm still 42, damn it. But like that decade, this last decade really was like making life decisions, making commitments, and living in a lack of control. And I just want to, that's really what I'm addressing here is how to live your life when you are not controlling every aspect of it. And for me, that control in my early 30s, when I was still like, 32, 33, 34, that was really like I was learning to sort of let go. I was learning to live in both of these worlds that I saw because I no matter how hard I tried to unsee what I had seen at 25, 26, 20, like, it wasn't working. It kept like rearing its ugly head in my life. And I kept having like symptoms of imbalance and like, okay, can't ignore this shit, but like now it's out of control because I've tried to ignore it so much. And now it's just bum kicking the door in, kicking the door. And I was just like, I got sick so many times because I didn't want to see this shit. I didn't want to be burdens with this information. I didn't know what to do with it. No one else was talking about it. No one else was acknowledging it. No one else was experiencing it. It was me alone, and it made no fucking sense. And it ruined my life so many times. And even no matter how hard I tried to explain it to doctors or my friends or my family, like no one understood. Everyone looked at me like I had 15 heads, and it fucking sucked. So what did I end up doing? I just ended up fucking embracing it. And that's when I started to find like around like 29 years old, I found Gabby Bernstein. She was having these conversations about like spirituality and just really what that tacit connection was between me and what I couldn't see, taste, touch, feel, explain. Like I could feel it, but I couldn't explain it. And that's, and I think a big part of this, which I did not address, was growing up. I grew up Catholic. My father is Italian and he raised me Catholic. But I always like prayed to God when I was a kid. I loved writing letters. I was like a pen pal with my third grade teacher and I journaled a lot. Like I just loved writing and having that meaningful connection when you put pen to paper to express yourself. That's what I loved. And I went to Catholic school and I ended up becoming a retreat leader and a confirmation sponsor for a couple different people. And even into college, my freshman year of college, I was leading encounters. And like, I remember when I went, there was this place called Asopus. And I remember that I was one of like group leader. And I had like this guy, this kid who was going to the encounters, like starting to like idolize me. And it was connected to, the man, Jesus. And at that point, I was so uncomfortable with what was going on. I definitely, I don't think I've ever said in my life, like I have Jesus in my heart. I do. Like I love what Jesus represents, what he stands for, the peace that he gives me in my heart when I think about him. But I wasn't like a Jesus woman, Jesus man. Like I wasn't like preaching the Bible. Candidly, I just didn't even really pay attention to all of the stories. Like there were certain stories that resonated with me, but I wasn't really studying and like living the Bible and religion, like whatever. Like if you want to call it whatever religion you grew up with, this is the same thing. But when I went to college and my grandma passed away, my grandma wasn't religious, but like that whole family was. My grandfather and his sister, my Aunt Katie, like everyone. I grew up in a town called Glen Cove, which was like very Italian, Catholic, just church going, Sunday dinner. But just, so that whole culture was very instilled in me. When my grandmother passed away and my family sort of broke up, and I went to school, I stopped and I had that experience of the encounter and that guy like sort of idolizing me. And I just was like, oh, that doesn't feel good. I'm going to step away from this because I actually don't believe in teaching this right now. Like, so I pretty much lost my faith. I wouldn't call myself an atheist at that time, but I just was not, I just completely separated myself from religion. And then later I had started to explore like my mind to Buddhism and then I started learning about throughout college, I learned about Judaism. But I just was separate from it all. And the reason I mention that is because when I had this spiritual awakening, it almost came out of the blue. It seemed just like very shocking and it seemed very foreign and it seemed like out of nowhere. And I mentioned the religion piece because I think connection to God is just very important. Last week I was calling it God, universe, whatever you want to call it, but like the feeling of there's a stream of information that I could plug into like an outlet and get more and more and more and more and more. And that's what I'm talking about, source, right? So when we look at this experience in the context of what I teach on this podcast, How to Heal, we have to integrate, which I talk about just tempering the source of information with the physical, the mental, the emotional. We have to temper the energetics of the spirituality pillar and like the expansiveness of that information with being fucking human. What I've learned is staying like sort of 50-50 is very difficult. That's where you really learn to get your footholds. And just before we go into how to live in the 50-50, you have to get your body under control. Like look at the low-hanging fruit, whatever that is. For me, it was diet. I read the book, The China Study. I stopped eating meat for about 6 years and I got much closer to my physical body and listening to what felt good and doing yoga and being in my body and exercising. And I was always athletic growing up, but I got really physical and comfortable being physical because I remember I would go to these classes and be like, oh, what a nightmare. I do not want to be exercising right now or doing yoga or being in this class. Like, what time is it? When are we getting out? Like, oh, like I hate my body or what did I don't want to look in the mirror or like, oh, like just to like really enjoying every moment that I'm in a studio being present with my body. And that takes a long time, but that is how we get physically fit in our body. I don't care what your weight is, as long as you are enjoying those moments in the room, you are learning how to be in your body. So just for simplicity's sake, and if you're interested to go to any other physical episodes and you help yourself to any other of the physical episodes that I post, but diet, and maybe next week I'll talk about the physical practices that have kept me in my body, but just really getting the junk out and feeling the good stuff. And your body is so wanting you to do that. Like your body responds so quickly to feeling good that it would surprise you. And then the mental portion of it was just like, okay, I'm going to learn that my negative self-talk has to come out on paper or I have to just literally start talking nice to myself. So what I did for years, which is like the most boring journal entries ever, was just fill a bunch of moleskin journals with positive things that I wanted in my life and positive thoughts. And I'm like, is this it? Like, this is so boring. But it was really the part that helped me mentally get my head wrapped around the fact that I didn't need to live with these negative thoughts, live with these untrue, false beliefs that I had about myself. And then the emotional part, which honestly came later. And it came in piecemeal, but it definitely was, learning how to emotionally address. Go to the episode with Amy Shearer if you want to learn more about that. There's some tools. I use this deck that she sells. It's called the How to Heal Yourself Oracle deck. It is so good. And you tap on your thymus gland, which is like, I guess, like where a bow tie would land, like the two little bones with the hole in between at the base of your neck. Like an inch and a half down from that, you'll feel like a bone come up on your sternum, on your chest, and that's your thymus. And you just tap that, and you basically take these oracle cards and you can just install positive emotions and release negative emotions. And it's so good, guys. I talk about it on that episode with her. Just like that is the dopest healing modality ever, because tapping on your thymus gland regulates your nervous system immediately. And then just like consciously installing positive emotions or releasing negative emotions is really, really powerful. In my yoga class yesterday, actually, I was installing and releasing emotions in Shavasana without actually tapping, but with just like embodying the feeling of what it felt like to tap, which I feel like also is directly related to what Joe Dispenza. I started to read his book, and basically the reason I say this is because he got into a terrible bike accident. And I feel like he was like paralyzed for a little bit, but he mentally went in and mentally and energetically addressed his spine vertebrae. And it's like a similar thing where it's like I'm not tapping, but I feel the healing associated and like in that particular area. That's what I was doing. He I don't know if he teaches that, but I just imagine that's what he does. So that's what I try to do. But yeah, so I want to just get through this because we're really at the tail end here. But I want to just cover. There's a part of me that wants to break this into two episodes, but I want to give you this all in this episode. With this diagnosis or the issue that I had dealt with, what I've had to learn is to separate from the emotion, separate from the outcome, separate from the circumstance, and not take it so personally. Because I think that, like, when you experience these heavy emotions or this fear or this black and white thinking or this like out of controlness, like the fact is none of us have control. None of us have control. And yeah, I didn't mention this, but like in the last decade of my life, like I've learned to live with a lack of control. Like I got married, I had children, I left a career that I built for years. I am putting myself out there in ways that doesn't make sense to a lot of other people. I that makes sense to really very little people. That I'm putting myself out there in ways that people have told me explicitly do not put yourself out there like that. And I think that there's just this sense of like, oh yeah, you can control your life. And the fact is that you can't. And the more that you are acting in a way where you have a lack of control of your life, but you are living, excuse me, there are the allergies, but you are living in alignment with what your internal compass is, with what feels right. That is not only the fucking scary, so scary, but the only way to live, the only way to come into life after you've had an awakening, after you've lost control of the ship. Like, this is the only way to live. And I mentioned this in last week's episode. Like, how do you know what you want to do? And it's like, you work, you get to work. You work on the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, understanding the energy, paying attention to it all, and rinse and repeat. And you do it all and all and all again. And now I recognize, okay, I have this life and I could also have another completely different life if I chose that. And it's like, am I making the right choice? Am I doing like, is everything like, am I making the right choice? Am I making the right choice? And the fact is that I don't have a choice to make right now. I'm mentally putting that pressure on me. So what you do is you consider both of the outcomes, but you don't get emotionally tied to it. You separate yourself from the emotion and then you decide which response is the healthy, balanced, grounded response in this moment. Maybe it's no response. Maybe it's coming within. Maybe it's taking care of yourself. Maybe it's doing the dishes. Maybe it's giving to someone else. Maybe it's expressing love to someone when you feel like you hate them. You know, little by little, this is how you build the resilience. This is how you take the next step in the uncertainty towards the best and highest outcome of your life. Understanding the situation for what it is, but not committing to either side consciously and like completely, like committing to both sides. Move forward and committing to both sides. You don't have to be right or wrong. This is an illusion here, black or white, light or dark. It's an illusion. Like we only have so much light without the dark. We only have so much dark without the light. Like I was like making a joke about this the other day. Like cellulite can look like, you can see cellulite in the proper light. Sometimes it doesn't look like you have some like cellulite. Sometimes it does. Like, it's all about perceptions and where you're holding your attention and where you are in the circumstance. Staying calm and while not having the answer and being in the moment and still not knowing what the answer is, that is where the next best step lies. It's very difficult to live in the middle. I'm not going to say that it's not, because once you see the other side, you're like, holy shit, I need to get to that other side. I need to get to the other side. But I have this whole life with me that I've created on the wrong side of the fence. And, but I just want to point out that you worked with the deck that you had up until the point with the best information that you had at the time. So you think you have control, but in reality, you do not have control. When you think you have control and you're driving in one direction, and then all of a sudden you get to the end and you're like, holy shit, I totally fucked that up. I just bulldozed all of this. Like, that's when you were realizing that you have no control, that you literally there have to be changes that must be made in order to live a more gentle, more compassionate life. Another way to help you with this is when you're paying attention to the subtle energy shifts and you breathe through them. So if you notice someone come into the room, or if you notice all of a sudden your energy shifts when you're alone, like I mentioned this, I get this right and left ear sensation that can be unpleasant. Like just breathe, like holding on to the response, like, oh, and then breathing through it, like not dropping it, like holding on to the response and continuing the breath in or the breath out wherever you are, and then exhaling or inhaling wherever you are, right? So just like dancing with life, flowing with life, paying attention to those subtle energy shifts and breathing through the moments of uncertainty, discomfort, anxiety, or honestly, other people's shit, candidly. There's no need to assume the responsibility of taking on and or neutralizing other people's emotions, because their emotions will always default back to how they're feeling in themselves. And then you'll just get further and further and further from how you feel. And you won't be able to tell where you are or where your mind is and where they are. And that's when you lose yourself. You have to learn where your own neutral is. But this is it, guys. This was the episode on moi. And yeah, I mean, this is definitely some vulnerable stuff that I'm sharing, but I share it in hopes that it resonates with you so that you understand why I'm teaching this and how it has worked for me. So I love you. I send you on your way, and I will see you next week.